What if I told you two young girls went hiking on a beautiful February afternoon, took a photo on an old railroad bridge, and then vanished without a trace?
And that photo, along with a grainy video and a haunting audio clip captured by one of the victims, became the central evidence in one of the most puzzling cases in modern American history,
A case that went cold for years.
until a shocking arrest 5 years later.
Abigail Williams, she was 13, and Liberty German, 14, were dropped off at the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana on February 13th, 2017. By that evening, they were missing.
And the next day, their bodies were discovered.
This case isn't just about a crime.
No, it's about how two brave girls left behind the crucial clues, how a small town just refused to give up, and how justice, finally arrived after years of agonizing silence.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime podcast show. Tonight, we're going to walk through the critical evidence, the shocking investigative missteps, and the legal controversies that defined the long road to a verdict in the Delphi murders.
Subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube, and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.
So, February 13th, 2017, it sounds like it was a pretty perfect day, especially for February in Indiana.
It really was unseasonably warm. I think it got up to almost 50 degrees. And you have these two best friends, Abby Williams and Libby German, heading out to explore the Monon High Bridge Trail. It was supposed to be a, simple day off from school.
It's a normal day.
Exactly. They were dropped off at the trail entrance near a place called Mears Farm around 1:49 p.m. Now, the bridge itself, the Monon High Bridge, it's a pretty intimidating structure. It's an old, abandoned railroad bridge, over 60 feet high, crossing Deer Creek. For local kids, it was.
Yeah.
It was an adventure spot.
And their last verifiable moment, sort of their last moment of pure innocence, was captured and shared on social media, wasn't it?
Precisely. At 2:07 p.m., Libby posted a photo on Snapchat. It shows Abby walking, so confidently across the narrow wooden ties of that bridge. That image, it's time-stamped forever. It's the last public record we have of the girls being okay.
And the plan was simple, just hang out for a bit and then get picked up.
Yeah, but they never showed up for their ride. And that's when the alarm spread, and it spread fast.
I can't even begin to imagine that feeling. The dread that sets in, it goes from, oh, they're just a few minutes late, to full-blown panic, especially in a place everyone knows.
The search started immediately that evening. You had local authorities, volunteer firefighters, hundreds of people from the community just pouring into the area. They were focusing on the woods, the creek bank, trying to ping the girls' cell phones, but
By then, the phones were probably dead.
dead or turned off.
Yeah.
The search went late into the night, but the area is huge. It was dark. It was just an impossible task.
And then the next morning, Valentine's Day, February 14th, the worst possible news.
Yes. The search went from a missing persons case to a horrific homicide investigation. Searchers found their bodies on private property near Deer Creek,
How far from the bridge?
about a quarter-mile east of it. And this just ripped through Delphi. It's a tiny community, maybe 3,000 people. The sense of fear, of violation, it was just profound.
It's in this devastating moment that Libby German's legacy just begins to shine through. The idea that she provided the only real leads, it's just an act of bravery that's almost unimaginable for a 14-year-old girl.
Investigators said it from the start. They called her a hero. In what must have been the most terrifying minutes of her life, she had the incredible presence of mind to secretly turn on her phone's camera and audio recorder.
And that evidence she captured became the cornerstone of the whole case for 5 years.
The only cornerstone.
So what did they find on the phone? What exactly did that digital evidence consist of?
Okay, so there are three distinct pieces. First, you have that Snapchat photo of Abby on the bridge at 2:07 p.m. Then, just 6 minutes later, at 2:13 p.m., there's a short, grainy video clip.
6 minutes, that's it.
That's it. The video is very short. It shows a man, later dubbed Bridge Guy, walking across the bridge toward them. It's not clear, but it gave them a profile. And then third, there's the audio clip.
The famous audio clip. What's the official transcript of what he says?
The audio, taken from that same video, has the suspect's voice, and it's this chilling command. Guys, down the hill.
Guys, down the hill.
That was the moment. Investigators believe that's when he confronted them, ordered them off the bridge, and down that steep embankment toward the secluded area where they were later found.
So there's only a 6-minute window between Libby posting that happy, normal photo of her best friend and her recording the killer commanding them. The speed of that escalation from safety to absolute terror is just sickening.
It is. It proved that they encountered him almost immediately after they reached the far side of the bridge. The evidence wasn't just, physical. It was a direct testimonial from the victim herself. It was the only concrete thing they had of what he looked like, how he walked, and what his voice sounded like.
That one action Libby pressing record is the reason this case didn't just disappear.
And that's the tragedy and the triumph, all wrapped into one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Her courage gave everyone hope, but it also launched this massive investigation that was, frankly, immediately overwhelmed. That initial flood of information, the national attention, it was a blessing and a curse. Libby's clues started this huge investigation, but it struggled to manage its own size from day one.
For a small town like Delphi, I mean, how could they handle that? How did the scale of the search actually manifest itself, like in terms of numbers?
The statistics are just staggering for a local case. Over the years, law enforcement processed more than 50,000 tips.
50,000?
50,000. Just imagine the manpower needed to log, track, and try to verify every single one of those leads. The FBI got heavily involved. They used something like 6,000 electronic billboards in 46 states, all showing the bridge guy image.
That sheer volume, it shows how much people wanted justice, but it also just creates so much noise, so much misinformation that can bury the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the community's response was just pure resilience. Fundraisers started right away. The reward fund grew to over $200,000, and people were mourning together, They did this Orange Lights for Abby and Libby tribute. It showed the world that Delphi was not going to forget.
But despite all that effort, and having those first clues from Libby's phone, the investigation just seemed to lose its way pretty early on, especially with identifying the suspect. I'm talking about the two completely different sketches.
Ah, yes. The shifting face of the killer. It's a huge source of confusion. The first sketch from 2017 showed a younger-looking guy. He was wearing a cap, looked almost boyish. It fit some of the early witness statements.
Okay, so that's the image people had in their minds for 2 years.
2 years. Then, in 2019, police just shocked everyone. They released a second, drastically different sketch. This one showed a man who looked much older, heavier, and had no cap.
How does that happen? I mean, how does a professional investigation with FBI resources go from one clear description to a completely contradictory one? What does that signal to the public?
It signals instability and doubt, and the defense later used that heavily. The problem is, eyewitness memory is famously unreliable, especially in high-stress situations. And the video itself is so grainy and ambiguous. When investigators pivot based on new witness accounts, they're basically admitting their first description might have been wrong.
When you show the public two different faces for the killer, you risk them just giving up. They start to doubt everything you release after that.
You're right. It broadens the scope way too much, leads to so many dead ends. The defense for Richard Allen pointed out that those initial descriptions, like boyish and youthful, did not match their client at all. He was 50 at the time.
It let them paint the investigation as this chaotic mess that just got lucky 5 years down the road.
That was the narrative.
And speaking of other leads, there is that whole digital trail they seem to ignore for 3 years. The connection to Keegan Kline and that Anthony Schatz account.
This is maybe the most troubling part of the early investigation. It's a fact that Libby was communicating with a fake online account called Anthony Schatz just hours before she was murdered. And we know that account was run by Keegan Kline, a convicted child predator.
But wait, they knew about this early on, didn't they? Why did it take so long to focus on him?
They knew about the digital communication, yes. The failure was connecting the dots quickly. They waited about 3 years, until 2020, before they really put the pressure on Kline. And when they finally did, he just lied and deflected.
What was the story with his account? What did he do?
Kline was using fake photos of a model to lure girls into talking with him. And when investigators finally dug in, they realized how deep the deception went. Now, he was never charged in the Delphi murders, but he was arrested in 2020 on a whole list of child exploitation charges.
So the defense's argument was that Libby was lured there, or at least talking to someone who knew her location through this account, and the police just, what? They just discounted it.
That was their point. They argued Kline's digital connection was concrete, provable, tied directly to Libby's phone. Richard Allen, on the other hand, was a total stranger. No known connection to the girls, digital or otherwise. The failure to really chase down the Anthony Schatz lead suggested the police were just too focused on the visual evidence, on Bridge Guy.
And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, all these dead ends and ignored leads, the man they eventually arrested was on their radar from day one.
He was. And this just shows you how deep the investigative failures went. Richard Allen, a local pharmacy tech, he voluntarily went to the sheriff's office in 2017, right after the murders,
To give a tip.
to give a statement. He admitted he was on the trail from 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. that day. He even put himself right there at the bridge.
What was his excuse for being there?
He said he was just walking, saw 3 young girls, but didn't interact with them. He gave this strange excuse that he was distracted by a stock ticker on his phone. It seems like investigators just didn't see him as a priority.
I can see how a local giving a simple statement might get filed away with 50,000 other tips, but isn't it just stunning that the man who put himself at the scene was dismissed for 5 years?
It is more than stunning. It's a huge institutional failure. Allen fell through the cracks. And later, the probable cause affidavit revealed they had even more on him early on. CCTV footage from a nearby business showed a car that looked like Allen's Ford Focus parked strangely near the trail entrance around 1:27 p.m.
Parked strangely how?
Almost as if the driver was trying to hide the license plates.
So he admitted being there, his car was spotted near the entrance, acting suspicious, and he still was allowed to just live his life in Delphi for 5 more years.
Yes. The combination of all those early mistakes, the sketches, ignoring the digital grooming angle, and then just misfiling Allen's own statement, it led to years of silence and agony for the families in the community.
Just unimaginable.
Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, rate, share, and comment on this episode to help us reach more people who need to hear Delphi murder's story. So after 5 long years of frustration, the investigation finally gets a breakthrough in October 2022. Richard Allen is arrested, the local pharmacy tech walking around Delphi this whole time. The proximity is just, it's terrifying.
What was it? What finally broke the case open? Was it a new witness or some new technology?
It was a forensic leap, but it was based on a meticulous review of the original evidence from the crime scene. The key was ballistics. They went back to this tiny piece of evidence found right between the girls' bodies. A single unspent .40 caliber cartridge.
An unspent cartridge, so the gun wasn't actually fired at the scene.
That's the crucial detail. When you have a semi-automatic weapon, like the Sig Sauer P226 they seized from Allen's home, and you rack the slide to load around, the mechanism can leave microscopic marks on the casing. If the shooter then clears the chamber without firing, maybe the gun jammed or they decided against it, that live round gets ejected. But the marks are still there.
So it proves that a specific gun was at the scene and that it was handled by the killer. It implies intent, or at least that he was armed and ready.
Exactly. The lab analysis matched those tiny markings on that unspent cartridge to Allen's handgun. The state's theory was that Allen had the gun, cycled around, ejected it for some reason, and then committed the murders with a knife.
Which would align with the crime scene being described as very bloody.
Correct.
So when they finally confronted him with this with the ballistics match in October 2022, how did he react?
He was totally defiant about it. He insisted the cartridge could not have come from his gun. He told police he only ever carried his pistol when he was fishing or mushroom hunting, which he said he wasn't doing that day. His exact quote was something like, "There is no way it's my bullet or that it came from my gun."
He just denied it over and over again.
20 to 25 times in that interrogation. But he couldn't deny being there, which he'd already admitted to in 2017. And this time, he gave them more details.
Like what?
Well, in 2022, he said he was at the bridge to watch the fish. And he confirmed he was wearing blue jeans and a blue or black Carhartt jacket. That clothing description was critical because it was totally consistent with what witnesses had described Bridge Guy wearing.
So they're building a case, the ballistics, the location, the clothes, but the interrogation itself became a huge issue, right? The investigator, Jerry Holman, admitted to being really aggressive.
He did, and that became a central pillar of the defense's argument later on. Holman testified that he lied to Allen about the evidence they had, that he shouted at him aggressively.
What did he say?
He testified that he screamed, "You killed those siffing girls. I know you did." And when Allen got agitated and told Holman to just arrest him, Holman apparently yelled back, "Happy to. You're ficking guilty, and I'm going to prove it."
Wow.
The defense argued that this kind of aggressive, unrecorded interview was designed to break a suspect, not to find the truth. It laid the groundwork for them to challenge the reliability of everything Allen said from that point forward.
So the prosecution has the ballistics, the location, the clothes, but then you get to the DNA hole. This seems like the biggest weakness in the state's case.
It is, without a doubt. The state's own DNA analyst testified that Richard Allen's DNA was not found anywhere at the crime scene.
Nowhere. Not even on the cartridge he supposedly handled.
Not on the cartridge. And, maybe even more damning, the girl's DNA was not found on any of the items they seized from Allen's home. Not on his jacket, his boots, his knives. Nothing.
Wait, hold on. If the crime was as violent as has been described, how can the state possibly argue for a conviction without a single speck of DNA linking him to the victims? That seems impossible.
It forces the prosecution to rely on circumstantial evidence and, theories about how evidence degrades over time.
Yeah.
They argued that getting touch DNA off a small cartridge is extremely difficult. They also said that the scene was so bloody that the victim's own fluids might have drowned out or contaminated any trace of the killer's DNA.
But isn't that argument that blood drowned out the evidence just incredibly convenient for the prosecution? It sounds like an excuse for a huge investigative failure.
It's the critical legal tension in the case. The defense said the lack of DNA was proof he didn't do it. The prosecution had to suggest that maybe Allen was just very careful, or that the lack of his DNA, combined with the lack of any other unknown male DNA, somehow made him the most logical suspect. It required the jury to trust the ballistics over the missing biology.
What about that hair that was found in Abby's hand?
Yes, another point for the defense. A single strand of hair was found clutched in Abby's hand. It turned out to belong to Kelsey German, Libby's older sister, who drove them there.
So family DNA?
Right. Investigators didn't initially test it against family members because they had no female suspects. The defense used that to say, look, if they missed something this simple, what else did they miss in a scene that was supposedly very bloody, but somehow had no suspect DNA?
So the conviction really rests on that ejected shell casing, a grainy video, and confessions that came later from a man who was in a questionable mental state.
It forced the state to pivot completely. They essentially told the jury, the video looks like him, his gun was there, and he confessed. They had to convince them that those three things were enough to overcome the massive forensic gap.
With the state's case having that huge DNA hole, the defense really zeroed in on undermining the reliability of Richard Allen himself, starting with his severe mental decline while he was in jail.
Allen's pretrial detention became a weapon for the defense. He was held in extremely restrictive solitary confinement, and they argued it led directly to his mental state just completely falling apart. They detailed these horrific self-harm incidents. He became psychotic, he was banging his head against the wall, and there were documented cases of him eating his own feces.
My God, I mean, they were painting a picture of someone being held under conditions that were basically torture.
That was precisely their argument. They brought in a Dr. Martin, who confirmed Allen was being involuntarily medicated with Haldol, an antipsychotic drug, starting in April 2023. They argued his jail experience, being treated like a prisoner of war, made any confession he gave completely involuntary and unreliable.
And yet, the prosecution leaned so heavily on those very confessions. How many times did he actually admit to it?
It was startlingly extensive. The prosecution presented evidence that Allen confessed to the killings over 60 times while he was incarcerated, to prison staff, other inmates, his psychologist.
Over 60 times.
But the prosecution's biggest piece of evidence was an audio recording of a phone call from April 3, 2023.
The call with his wife, Kathy. What did he say?
On that recording, which the jury heard, Richard Allen repeatedly told his wife that he killed Abby and Libby. For the prosecution, that was the ultimate admission of guilt. But the context of the call was complex.
How did his wife react, and how did Allen himself explain it?
His wife, Kathy, was just in denial. You can hear her on the calls telling him, no, you didn't do it. You're not well. You didn't do those things. And Allen himself sounded confused. One minute he'd say he thought he did it, and the next he'd say he felt like he was losing his mind or couldn't remember.
So the defense argued these weren't sane confessions, but the ramblings of a man who was psychotic and being manipulated.
Exactly. They wanted the jury to see the confessions as a tragic result of his confinement, not a statement of guilt.
And then, moving from the psychological to the just, truly bizarre, the defense tried to introduce this radical theory about an alternative killer, the whole Odinism controversy.
This was their big swing to introduce reasonable doubt. They suggested the murders were a ritualistic sacrifice carried out by a Norse pagan or Odinist group. They filed this huge 136-page document detailing the whole theory.
What evidence did they claim pointed to a ritual?
They alleged the crime scene had these very specific pagan symbols formed with sticks, with tree branches, and on a tree. They described sticks forming an asterisk or V shapes and small stakes positioned to look like horns. They presented it as a ritual staging.
That seems like an unbelievable leap. I mean, from a lone killer to an organized pagan group. How did they connect that to Richard Allen or anyone else?
The connection was drawn through the prison where Allen was being held. The defense claimed some of the guards were Odinists. They even had affidavits saying some guards wore patches identifying their religious beliefs. So the defense suggested Allen's confessions were coerced by Odinist guards who were somehow linked to the crime scene.
But the judge, Judge Gull, she threw that whole theory out. How can a court just exclude a defense theory like that?
Well, Judge Gull ruled that the defense failed to establish any real link between the alleged ritual and Richard Allen, or any other credible suspect. In our legal system, speculative theories, especially ones based on ambiguous symbols that could just be random sticks in the woods, are usually excluded. She said it was too speculative and would just prejudice the jury.
So that narrowed the focus right back to the ballistics and Allen's confessions.
It did. And after all the delays and arguments, the case finally went to the jury. They deliberated for 19 hours over 3 days.
A long time.
Which tells you how complex they found the circumstantial evidence. But on November 11, 2024, Richard Allen was found guilty on all counts.
The weight of that verdict, after almost 8 years, it must have been overwhelming for the families.
The sentencing was on December 20, 2024. Allen received 130 years in prison, 65 years for each count, served consecutively. For the families, there was immense relief that a verdict was finally reached. For Delphi, a chapter closed, but the questions raised by that trial, they definitely lingered. But even with that 130-year sentence, the appellate process guarantees this case is far from over. Richard Allen's attorneys are actively preparing their appeal, and it's going to be an exhaustive process.
Given the sheer volume of this case, I can't imagine how difficult that preparation must be.
It's extremely difficult. His lawyers had to ask for an extension just to file their first briefs. They said the trial transcript alone is over 5,000 pages, and there are thousands of exhibits. It's just a massive legal undertaking.
So what are their strongest arguments for the appeal? Which constitutional issues do they think have the most merit?
They've identified at least 10 issues, and 9 of them are about Allen's constitutional rights. I think their strongest points will center on the confessions. They'll argue that the aggressive interrogation, combined with his documented psychosis and the conditions of his confinement, which they'll say violated his rights against cruel and unusual punishment, made his confessions involuntary.
And if the appellate court agrees that the confessions were coerced?
It could unravel the state's entire case. The confessions were what they used to fill that huge DNA hole.
What about the Odinism theory? Will they challenge their right to present a full defense?
Absolutely. That's the second major pillar of their appeal. They'll challenge Judge Gull's decision to exclude the Odinism theory and evidence about other potential suspects, like Keegan Kline. They'll argue that by blocking those alternative narratives, the court basically funneled the jury toward a guilty verdict based only on the ballistics.
So if the higher court agrees that he was denied the right to a defense, or that the confession shouldn't have been admitted, this whole thing could be overturned.
That's the vulnerability of the conviction. The prosecution stuck to a very simple, lone killer narrative. The appeals court will have to decide if procedural rigor was sacrificed just to get a resolution.
And no matter what happens legally, the story always comes back to Delphi and to Abby and Libby.
Their legacy absolutely endures. The community built the Abby and Libby Memorial Park in their honor. It's a tribute, a place for healing. Their courage is still the defining part of this entire tragedy.
It's just extraordinary to think about Libby's final act, that 1 6-second video, that little piece of audio recorded in the face of absolute terror. That's where justice began.
Her actions shaped the entire investigation. The conflict now is whether the system relied too heavily on what she provided and maybe sacrificed some rigor to get to the finish line. The legal precedent set by this appeal, especially about confessions from mentally compromised people, it's going to resonate far beyond Indiana.
Despite the finality of the 130-year sentence, the appellate process guarantees this case will be under a microscope for years. You have the conflict between the simple story of a lone killer, Richard Allen, and all this complex excluded evidence, the digital grooming, the ritual staging defense. It leaves the whole legal foundation feeling vulnerable.
Right.
So you have to ask, did the system prioritize getting a resolution over procedural rigor? And what kind of precedent will the appeals court set about confessions obtained from a defendant who is so clearly and so severely mentally compromised?
Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, rate, share, and comment on this episode to help us reach more people who need to hear Delphi murder's story.